Welcome to QA Q&A. I am your host Shweta. Today we have a special guest, Maaret Pyhäjärvi, a well-known software tester and influencer in the European testing community. With over 25 years of experience testing in different industries, project teams, and technology, Maaret has built a reputation as a skilled and fast learner. In fact, she has gotten feedback such as you are the fastest learner we've ever met. She's currently a principal test engineer at Vaisala, a global leader in weather, environmental, and industrial measurements. Maaret is a recipient of two prestigious awards, the Eurostar Testing Excellence Award and the Agile Testing Professional Person Award, making her the only person in the world to have won both. She is a significant player in the European testing community and continues to spread her knowledge and passion for testing. Let's welcome Maaret, one of Finland's best known software testers.
Hello.
Hello, Maaret. It is such an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for agreeing on the first instance.
It's definitely my pleasure. I've been looking forward to the chance of having a conversation with you, and I just don't mind the fact that it's recorded and taped. I've been also a big fan of you for a very long time, so I'm very honored to be here.
I just hope I'm able to contain my excitement after listening to those words and carry on with the show. But I don't mind, carrying on with with over excitement and over enthusiasm. I just don't mind. And since our topic for today is agile testing, let's begin with our first question, which is personally, do you have any preference for any of the agile frameworks like Scrum, Kanban, Lean, XP, FDD? And if so, why?
I've been doing work with the different agile frameworks probably since 1999. Like that's the year when I started researching agile and I kind of got to know all of these different frameworks. And I can't say I have a particular preference on any of them, but if I'm a little bit more tilted to one, I think it would be towards Kanban. So a lot of the concepts that I use come from the lean world and the Kanban way of thinking. But there's, of course, a lot of adaptations, particularly from XP, which is pretty much the only one of these frameworks with any technical practices on how the teams actually collaborate to create software.
Yeah, I have to say Kanban is my preferred style as well. It's just that there's so much of things that get done and it's focusing on getting more things done rather than queuing up things. Okay. And which agile testing methodologies do you prefer based on your experience so far?
I feel like I'm kind of cooking up my own to some extent. So I'm not sure if there's one particular one that I would kind of identify with. I've been maybe recently labeling my own style as this like rebel way of doing agile testing or rebel way of even developing software in agile cases, because some of the things that I really kind of strongly believe in is things like, team ownership of not just doing the work, but also what works needs doing. So I've had no product owner, no estimates, no test cases, no test documentation, like all kinds of no things that many people kind of consider very relevant. And what I think in terms of Agile more is kind of like we have stages of discovery and we have stages of delivery. And there's definitely a testing perspective to both discovering what's the right thing, just enough, but not too much, and then on delivering that. And I'm kind of, always available on both different kinds of activities.
Okay, and are there any existing videos or blogs that our readers can read more about, the customized way or the preferred way of doing it?
There's plenty of stuff around. I don't know if there's a single thing that I can point you to, but I have definitely been blogging about my way of working in Agile teams in my blog, Visible quality, visible-quality.blogspot.fi. And there's this talk that I've been doing called Agile as if you meant it. So if you look for that, you can probably find that as well. So it kind of phrases some of these very modern Agile style ways of working that I tend to bring with me into the teams that I work with.
Fantastic, fantastic. And what testing practices would contribute to successful agile delivery? I think you just mentioned you started cooking your own, but some known testing practices that would contribute to successful agile delivery.
So typically you would start on the discovery side, like collecting examples that help with the idea that, whatever misconceptions, misunderstandings, missing information we in the team have, or what the developers in particular have, that ends up usually in the testing stage or at worst in production. So any examples that help us understand what is it that we're actually building and participating in co-creation of those examples early on before we build that feature. That's definitely one of the main practices. But another one that I'm very keen on is kind of like this idea of following the change. Like anything that changes in production in modern software development projects changes by someone going into version control and changing something. So, even environments, test environments, we'd like to keep them nowadays version controlled. Like infrastructure as code is kind of like a big thing in the tech world. And that way, kind of like you can see when things are changing, like you can have that version control of any of the changes that are coming your way. So when you follow those changes and you kind of design your testing so that it's taking into account all of the different changes, you can see summaries of the changes, whatever changed in the last week. You understand why was it changing, but what exactly was changed. You can do a lot better kind of targeted testing and agree with your team what you do. And I think the third practice that I really need to mention is the kind of sharing all of the work with your entire team. So a lot of times in pre-agile times, we had the system testing that was the tester's responsibility. And kind of like, we took care of that. Now we need to share even that work with the rest of the team, kind of like allow the developers to participate in system testing, do pair testing, do whatever helps us kind of to collaborate on that. Test automation in particular needs to be co-owned by the team, or when you leave, it will not be left behind after you. So having that in as a team thing, but also avoiding things on the system testing level by knowing what goes on the unit and integration testing levels, like the more code-oriented, developer intent-oriented tests. So having kind of like that full perspective, but being willing to share all of those levels, I think that's the third core practice that I definitely would go for.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you. And so how can testers effectively collaborate on user stories?
Testers collaborate on user stories. Well, how can anyone effectively collaborate on user stories? It would be great if we had the user, first of all. We didn't just have the story, but we would have the user telling the story. So creating some kind of like a way of meeting and having real, face-to-face or remote face-to-face conversations with your users, that would be definitely a good one. But another one is making sure that, we create that one, liner of whatever we need to remember. What did we agree? What was the conversation? So a lot of times we talk about this idea that user stories, there's like the card, there's the conversation, and there's the confirmation, like the 3 C's around user stories. So someone needs to write down that card. And, it could be, the tester who helps to some extent, at least sometimes in the teams, to write down that card. The conversation, you're part of that conversation. You are not dominating that conversation, but you're not also silently taking it in. You are an equal participant. That's the second part of how to do that. And the third part, the confirmation, you probably have some special scenarios that other people might not think in that moment that would be helpful to maybe have and add into that conversation. And again, it can be a basic scenario, it can be a special scenario, it can be something really kind of, out of the box thinking, but kind of trying to find that angle that you can bring into a meaningful conversation before you start implementing. I think that's what we generally would do.
Yeah, I think you've stressed the importance of listening well, as well as giving your contribution by sharing your experience. Wonderful. And so, what would be the anti patterns in agile testing in that case?
Do you think there's anti-patterns as such? Like, there's many things where we're kind of like experimenting our way into a good teamwork, and different teams have a little bit different ways of working and different expectations. But I wouldn't really call any of that anti-patterns. It's more like noticing that things could be better, or you could try something different. Because as humans, what I've noticed is that we're kind of like, we're somehow more active when there's change coming about. So even when we have like the perfect recipe of having these user story and acceptance criteria related conversations, we probably will do better when we agree that, for a month, let's not do any of that. Let's try being without. And then we know what we missed when we no longer had it. So kind of like, when you make changes, if you don't make changes, if you're not continuously kind of like inspecting and adapting the way that you work and try to find something that keeps your energy high, but also keeps the clarity of the team intact and kind of like, there needs to be a forward driving force. Maybe that would be an anti-pattern. But then again, like that's an anti-pattern in life. Like if we don't learn, if we don't try to figure out how we're happy and productive and how do we use our time well, then, it's not just agile testing. It's pretty much anything in life that the same applies for.
That's such an interesting take on anti-patterns is in general. I'm going to take that perspective to my team. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So, are there any myths in agile testing in that case?
I think there's plenty of myths around, and a lot of them come around kind of like the instructions and ways of how we could work together. Kind of like someone describes a methodology of some sort, and then we're kind of like just blindly following it. And I'm kind of recognizing many of the myths maybe by someone telling me in a team that, they usually look at me and they say, "Oh, I read the Scrum book. This is not how it's supposed to happen." So that's a good way of recognizing some of the generations of how we come up to these ideas that maybe are not as true as we'd like them to be. Like definitely someone mentions it in a book, but it doesn't mean that it's the only way and the only option and the only interpretation of things. And maybe in testing in particular, I think the main myth that I would generally see is the kind of like gatekeepery role. A lot of times working with tools like Jira, we have that, the swim line where all things go to the testing column before they're closed. And I think we have this myth of kind of like, ending up being in the gatekeeper role in a lot of agile teams. And we also keep feeling like we're really busy because we're kind of like, we are there to start things, but we're there to end things, and kind of like everything flows through testers in some of the teams. And I think that particularly is one of the harmful myths that we need to get rid of. Start letting half of them go without you verifying them as the team's tester. Someone else can also verify them, and eventually maybe get rid of that whole testing column where things kind of need to flow through you, and find better ways of following that change with the schedule that works for you in a way that helps you give the right information, right quality related information, which is what we basically do when we are testing.
Okay, so folks, Maaret says that testers being perceived as gatekeepers, not happening, not doing.
Yeah. And also I'm saying that sometimes we behave as if we need to be the gatekeepers. We need to let go of it. So again, kind of watch the way that you behave, how you look at things, how you collect things. Does everything have to go through your hands? And my best practice of how to get rid of that, go to conferences and speak in conferences. Then you're away from work, and they need to actually be able to do things without you. If they can't if they can't let you go to a major conference somewhere abroad for 3 days of the week, and they're completely missing you, then you're probably still in that gatekeeper role. So that's a good test case for anyone to notice if you're positioning still yourself as that gatekeeper.
Right. Probably bringing in quality as a whole team responsibility would, one of the actionable steps for that.
Yeah. Yeah, we had in one of those, the teams that we have, we had a tester who was kind of building test automation for the team, and everyone in the team absolutely loved that person for the contributions. But he left the company about 6 months ago, and it took us 3 weeks, actually a little less than 3 weeks, before all of the test automation that he had contributed was no longer in use in the team. So that's also kind of like just a way of kind of, sharing a small warning or a story of the idea that the whole team thing is so that we would have continuity with anything and everything we are doing. So some of the most value that we as testers can provide for our teams is to help the work continue when we are away, when the next person comes in. And for people who can do that, there's always the next place to go to.
Brilliant, brilliant. So not having a superstar in the team. Okay. And so what would be the must-have skills to be an agile tester, or I would say to be an agile team player?
I don't know if there's must-have skills. What I think in terms of skills is more on the side of you need to have certain skills in your team. Like someone needs to be good at coming up with, versatile ideas for what we're testing. But it doesn't have to always be the tester. You could also have a tester who is more of an execution-oriented person, as long as someone is generating those ideas of where should we use time, what kind of things we should be executing on. So it's not so much on what are the skills that you need as an individual so that you would have all, but it's more like looking around you and seeing what the others are already contributing and being like, the water that fills all the nooks and crannies in the team. I think that type of kind of shape shifting into whatever is missing from the team, it's a typical thing that you would expect to see in a tester. And in an agile tester, it is actually even, there's more nooks and crannies to fill in that sense that you no longer necessarily have a test manager separately. You might actually not even have a second tester in your team. You might be the only tester in that team of yours. And generally there would not necessarily be a testing team, but it would be a development team with a tester in it. So kind of like you can't take everything that you've learned to be testing from your past non-agile projects, but you have to kind of figure out what are the things that your personal traits, personal skills kind of are now good, and just keep stretching your own skills, kind of like always look for the next thing you can add. I've just realized that, 25 years, I've been collecting so many skills and so many things I didn't know how to do, but I have been a tester for 25 years. So I think I had the skills 25 years ago already, because that's kind of how I ended up being hired. But I have different skills, but still relevant skills today. So I think we shouldn't be comparing ourselves, to anyone other, but kind of more look at the kind of team composition and like, is there something valuable that we can, with our skills, our current knowledge, contribute to the team that we are at right now?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, you spoke of being that water slipping through cracks, and I've read a very similar concept on being glue code. And I feel I have always been that glue code tester in whichever teams I've also worked. So yeah, I mean, I kind of align with that part. And you've mentioned a couple of challenges that you've faced in your, in few of the projects. But could you elaborate on a few more challenges that you faced being part of an agile team, and how you've resolved them?
I usually come into a lot of new teams, so I keep facing the same challenges over and over again. And one of the main things that I seem to be kind of the go-to person nowadays is this whole idea of continuous delivery, continuous releases. So I've been over the last 3 years in Vaisala that I've been here. I've been going to various teams, and usually I start by measuring how long does it take for us to, decide we would do a release to actually have that release out. And it seems to be somewhere around 34, 36 days typically before I enter. And these are already agile teams. So even in an agile team, it is not obvious that we know all of the, the right moves and the right designs of how to effectively continuously deploy and continuously deliver. And we might not have the technical support for that, but it's less of technologies and a lot more of the right way of thinking, kind of following the change early on so that you don't have to kind of bundle up the change into something you would call release testing in the end. Like it's a very short period of time if you have this kind of like a mindset shift. So that's definitely a challenge, kind of like going from that 36, 34 days to less than 4 hours, which is the repeated scenario that I seem to be now going through. So kind of like creating that atmosphere where there's a continuous release and the test management style and the allowance of testing is also in that style. It makes, everyone's life so much better. That's one of the main challenges. But I think the other one is kind of figuring out what you've done, what other people have done, kind of like having that coverage visibility and that kind of like testing the things you need to confirm and testing the things you need to stretch, and then combining test automation into that process. That's another challenge. So I've been recently introducing this idea that we should do like a test automationist gambit. We could start exploratory testing by making notes from the very first minute with automation, and then the automation could grow while we are doing exploratory testing and leave behind better automated documentation. So kind of like changing mindsets so that we wouldn't have, specially dedicated people who don't touch automation and then other people who only touch automation but don't do anything that stretches us out of the box. Kind of bringing those two together, I would definitely name that as my other challenge that I keep running into and need to solve in teams.
Okay. And on a similar note, then, what programs or what activities or what tactics have you used to ensure collaboration between all members in an agile team? Let's say the developers, the testers.
Usually first of all, you have the agile ceremonies. Like you have meetings where you do things together. Usually you would have something of a planning. It might be that it's not a sprint planning, but it might be just a planning on a cadence so that you kind of, look forward in time. You look at what's now on the plate. You reprioritize whatever you need to do. So something of that sort is definitely kind of like a foundation. And then probably you would have daily or, whatever kind of meetings that you feel like you need in order to have that space for collaboration. But I am a big kind of like, I would like to avoid as much of the M&M management and meetings as possible. So that's why I even use these words like ceremonies to say that these are ceremonies that I really want to minimize. I want only as little as possible of those so that we would have as little of management and meetings and as much space for actual work as possible. So I would much rather do pair programming, pair testing, ensemble programming, ensemble testing. The difference being that in a pair you have 2 people, in an ensemble you have 3 or more people working on the same thing on the same computer at the same time. So it's not a meeting. It's not kind of like, creating a plan out of what you're doing, but it's actually collaborative way of working on a thing and figuring out, what I can contribute and learn and what you can contribute and learn in that same task. And it's the best way that I know of to, collaborate and learn things that you didn't know that you did not know. Because when you don't know, you can't ask.
Right. And these are such wonderful on-ground tips. I remember I was introduced to ensemble testing by you in one of the previous conferences that I had, I was looking through your sessions and where you were talking about ensemble testing. And I took it actually back to my team. And we have these learn clubs running at Axelerant. And I conducted one of the Learn Club sessions for Cyprus using ensemble testing throughout. And it was a super hit. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, we introduced in my previous team earlier on when I was starting with ensemble testing, we introduced Selenium this way. Like, no, we can't do any
Okay.
browser automation. We have nothing of that. Like, someone needs to take a few months and learn it. Like, no, like, let's, all get together and just write a few first scripts. And after we had that, team of 10 together in the meeting, creating in the ensemble for 1.5 hours, creating our first tests, 8 of us continued adding more after that.
Yeah,
So kind of like it's the fastest way that I know of to introduce a new thing in a very hands-on way. So it's not the theory of it. It is kind of like, let's do something with whatever we are about to be working on.
agreed. I am personally in love with the ensemble technique actually.
And that's definitely my favorite as well.
Okay. And you've been associated with the community for so long, and you've been in the industry for 25 years. Uh, how does our audience stay current with new developments and trends in, especially in this, agile testing world? And could you also name some useful communities and forums for the audience?
Yeah, staying current kind of requires you to look outside your own organization and not just kind of stick with the work, but find some kind of a cadence where you take an hour every now and then to see what goes on in the world. I have personally, I have kind of like two activities around that. One is I have this mechanism where I just stare at the white wall, just thinking about what am I learning from my own work and what do I want to kind of, change from that. So I'm a big fan of post-it notes, and a white wall is the most inspiring thing, kind of like an external imagination, just like the application is when you're testing, it's an external imagination. A white wall is that for me. And together with post-it notes, it is awesome thing to have. But it only helps you kind of source whatever you have seen around you, and you probably want some external sources as well. But I wanted to start with the internal sources because I think we are sometimes under appreciating what we have if we look a little deeper at how we are right now working. We're always looking for that guru outside. So for finding the gurus outside, finding good people to talk about stuff, I would usually go to social media. So now I'm definitely on Mastodon myself. That's where I get, people sharing an article with excitement, finding someone you think is worthwhile following and following everyone they mention. That's how you kind of build this little corner of the world that you can also curate for the right kind of contents. And of course, there's all kinds of RSS feeds where you can go and look for topics of interest, whatever you are trying to figure out now. But what I kind of recommend to people is start with persons. Look at the things that whole people are looking at, and don't just look for kind of like tools or responses on how do you code this in this language and in this tool, but also kind of try to figure out what's driving people, like the motivational forces. Read some stuff around that one as well. So kind of like holistic sampling is probably my go-to mechanism, and people first.
I think that's a rich piece of advice there. And with words of wisdom, we've come to the end of this episode of QA Q&A. Thank you everybody for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed our discussion about agile testing and so much beyond that. We are grateful to Maaret for sharing their expertise and insights with us, and we hope you were able to take away not some but a lot of valuable information with you today. And we appreciate your support and feedback as always. If you have any questions, please don't forget to comment below this video, and we'll get back to each and every query of yours. For more QA content, don't forget to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. We look forward to bringing you more engaging content on quality and testing. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on QA Q&A. Bye-bye.